Good morning. I'd first like to start off by thanking our personnel staff, coaches, football operations department for getting us to where we are at this point in the season. They put a tireless effort and energy into this process, so I always want to make sure I start off by thanking them. We are excited about where we are with the roster at this point. We have a really good feeling about how we want to play and the vision for this team, but we both know that it's a commitment to the process, getting better every day, that's going to take us where we want to go. These last few days have been hard for a lot of people. It starts with the draft, where I get to be on one end of the phone starting NFL dreams, and then we have to be in offices having hard conversations, delaying people's NFL dreams, which isn't a great feeling for them or for myself or Kevin. But, if something like that gets easier over the years, it'll mean that I've lost the respect and admiration I have for these great players who give us everything, so I don't necessarily want them to ever stop being hard conversations. As our team takes shape, we're excited about where we are, but we know the challenges that are ahead, and we're excited to take them on.
Yeah, I can just echo, this week's been hard. It's been really hard for a lot of reasons. I, previously had thought, since I had quite a bit of experience being on the other side of those conversations throughout my career, that, maybe it would make it easier, maybe it would make it, less of an impact personally on myself, selfishly, but it did not. And I think it's because of the players, and I think it's because of, from day one, when you're carrying 90 guys on the roster, the hope is you have a culture built around the principles of what you believe are very, very important. And the best part was knowing that these guys, to a man, time and time again, were telling Kwesi and myself that exists here, and that's why they want to be here. And although it was unfortunate, they were appreciative of how we operate, how we're trying to build our team, and ultimately what's to come. But tough week for sure, but I will tell you I'm very, very excited, as I told our team yesterday, about all those guys sitting in the room, all the guys we were able to get back on our practice squad. Our coaching staff is just so fired up and ready to go to start putting this thing together 1 week at a time, trying to be the best version of this year's team that we can be.
You guys don't look like assassins, but do you feel that way when you send that many people on the street?
Yeah, I know. I certainly do not. Especially there was you don't even throughout our roster, no matter what a guy's individual journey was, this off season. You just feel like I think the best conversations that I've had in those situations in the other side. Sitting on the other side was when coaches still took that moment to tell me what I could do better, what I did well, what I could have done better, and this is what you need to do to possibly cement yourself on an NFL roster, either here or somewhere else. And I think as honest as you can be, the players respect that, but nonetheless, the news you're giving is the exact opposite of what they've always hoped and dreamed to hear, and you know that. So there's definitely something to it that sticks with you.
What was the, sort of thought process behind the Rieger trade and having to get rid of Smith-Marsette?
Yeah, we always look at opportunities. We call it no stone unturned. We're always looking at opportunities to improve the team. We saw Jalen as somebody who has a really great skill set individually, but also how he complements that room, and then also our offensive football team. So ultimately, when the value proposition meets the kind of what you have in mind in terms of vision, you make those decisions. Smith-Marsette's a really great kid. He had a great summer. We think he has a bright future. The NFL gives you 53 spots and 16 practice squads, and you have to follow those rules, and sometimes those are tough decisions you have to make.
How about the other move? You got Blacklock, and then you let Armon Watts go. A lot of people were surprised at Watts being let go. Obviously, he was first team on the depth chart. Why letting him go, and then kind of replacing him, one might say, with Blacklock?
Yeah, again, it's not, I don't get specific on individual moves, but you're really just trying to always think about how your team shapes and it fits and different skill sets you're trying to add. We thought that was an opportunity to add somebody in Blacklock who's got a really good pass rush skill set, really disruptive in that phase, in the run game, also disruptive. And so we're trying to add that skill set also along our time horizon of where we're trying to compete in this league. It just, again, sometimes those deals make sense. And again, that was a hard conversation with Armon, somebody who's been here for 3 years, been productive, a great teammate, great person. To Larry's question earlier, there's times when you're in those meetings where how it goes, you wish you could take it back, almost.
17-game season, you got 53 players in the roster. How do you know that you have enough depth? And do you feel that you have enough depth? Probably for both of you.
Yeah, I think that is a great question, and it's probably it's the hardest question you ask when you're trying to find exactly what numbers you want to try to keep at each position, but ultimately understanding that depth can look a lot of different ways. What are we talking about? Are we talking about offensive line, defensive line? Are we talking about DBs and receivers that have roles on special teams and maybe where other guys have not been able to define those roles for themselves? We really got to think about the 53, and as I told a lot of the players, the way the rules are now with the ability to activate individual players off the practice squad for games and still protect them for a certain amount of time, we can really piece together a larger roster than just the 53 guys. And that's what went into a lot of the conversations about the practice squad. But ultimately, how we're going to use our personnel, how we're going to try to attack our opponents and play great in all three phases, it comes down to obviously those starters, but then the depth you're talking about, and that goes into every single conversation that Kwesi and I had.
The Jets cut 7 guys, and all 7 got picked up. And the Vikings cut 6 guys with contracts left, and mine got picked up. So does that speak to what? Does that speak to the Jets being stronger, the Vikings being weaker? Help me with that.
I know for me looking at it, I think, even the conversations of potential claims, conversations of adding people to our roster, when you're at 53, that means that somebody's going to have to go. I think it's such an individual what is the position, what's the need, who became available, and then ultimately how do they affect the other guys, not only in that room but on that side of the ball. So you'd like to be able to look into it and find some concrete measurables or some outcomes from that you can say this is what it was and this is what it is now. I just don't know. I don't know if you can do that looking at all 32, Larry. I don't, and I think that. I know personally, if I start looking into that and thinking backwards about whatever our roster may or may not have looked like, all I know is I'm really darn excited about not only the 53 guys we have on our team, but plus the guys that we feel like will make an impact off of that practice squad for our team.
Kwesi, when you trade for a Jalen Reagor or a Ross Blacklock, how much weight is still given to like the pre-draft scouting report with coaches or scouts heading into that 2020 draft versus what they've put on tape over the last 2 years and who they are as players now?
It's a great question. Ultimately, it's some element of both. But just remember, we weren't here when those decisions were made at those organizations. So Kevin and I get together with our new staff and our coaching staff and kind of talk about the player that we saw them being coming out, and then also the new information we've got. And all that is combined into our decision. And ultimately, it's no perfect science. It's a little bit art, a little bit of science. But we like the decision we made.
Kwesi, how much thought did you put into keeping a third quarterback on the 53-man? And since both Mond and Mannion have moved on, where does that kind of leave you now that for the third guy you're going to have to bring in somebody cold, apparently?
Yeah, those are ongoing conversations Kevin and I have. Obviously, you're always looking at that third quarterback, the sixth wide receiver. It's that delicate balance that you have, and ultimately, you're trying to prepare for this 17-week war that we've got coming, and you don't know what's going to show up later, and you just ultimately got to do the best you have with the information you have at the time. We're currently looking at different options for the third quarterback, and ultimately, you'll see that decision when we make it.
Kind of take us through the thought process at the backup quarterback, starting in the spring when you bring Sean back and you already had Kellen, and then you go through and then eventually trade for Nick, and take us through like kind of what you were thinking along those lines, and also like what, if anything, do you think was lost by not having Nick here, in the spring, or whoever was going to be the number 2 here the whole time?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, Kwesi and I talked a lot about making sure we wanted to provide a very fair, open competition between those two guys. They were both at completely different points in their career, and quite honestly, probably needed work in different areas of their game while still getting the opportunity to split those reps. And I know folks don't get to see every rep. You guys, I think do a great job at our practices of being aware of what's going on. But when you look at it, it's pretty remarkable just how close the rep count ended up being, both in games and throughout the spring and summer. I think for the biggest thing for me was understanding that we wanted to be able to push Kellen to get better every single day, continue to feel comfortable finding a fit in our offense. And I thought Kellen improved tremendously from the time we got him in the spring all the way through. Obviously when we had to have a tough conversation with him, he's got a heck of a football journey ahead of him. I'm a big fan of how Kellen works. I'm a big fan of the human being, and I think he's got all the things you look for in an NFL quarterback. It just at the time for us, you can put a lot of pressure on a player if he's not ready. And in my personal opinion, I still think Kellen's got tremendous upside, but to ask him to be that number 2 quarterback, being a snap away on a team we feel very strongly about competing on, I didn't think that was fair to Kellen. And then with Sean, I thought it was very important that Sean got, even though maybe at times it might not have felt that he needed equal reps as a guy you're trying to develop. I think it's fair in a new offense to give that guy the opportunity to compete. And there were different moments in time in that competition where one guy may have been ahead of the other, depending on how you looked at it. What phase of offense are we talking about? What are we asking them to do? But ultimately for Nick, answering your final question, knowing the player, knowing the makeup, knowing just the type of work ethic, and then the 17 games that he's played and the impact he had on those teams, not always in the most ideal situations, able to compete, able to show his skill set and his traits of how he'll fit into what we do, and I think he's already shown to me that I'm really fired up to have Nick here, and we'll continue to be excited about that.
Kevin, is it realistic that Blacklock can fit in where Armin Watts was in that defensive line, or is that position up for grabs in the next week or so?
Yeah, I think we obviously see a role for him, but I think you got to look at the rest of that room. I thought our D-line and Coach Chris Rumpf and Alik, they did a great job with that room. Obviously, the addition of Harrison Phillips in the interior with Dalvin Tomlinson, who, in my opinion, had one of the best camps on our team, really flashing over. I can't tell you how many times I was showing the team a clip of DT making a play in the run game, taking on double teams, all the facets of how we play. We play a lot of personnel groupings. We activate those edge players. We've got plenty of scheme, depending on what we think is the best way to play each and every week defensively. But ultimately, I think we feel great about that addition, in addition to the fact that a guy like Bullard shows up here and has a real impact on our run defense. And when you're calling plays against those guys every day, and shoot, we should have good angles, we should have good leverage, it should be a good run. Why wasn't it? As a head coach and offensive play caller, you start seeing why, and a lot of those guys showed up. And Armand had a really good camp. Now I don't want to at all think that this was any more. It was more about the player we could add, the circumstances around that, and then the fit for the rest of that room and that front seven.
Is the
What's
plan
the
for
greatest challenge in taking over this organization, changing the culture, the offense, the defense, or the restrictions in regard to the cap and the depth?
Well, I can speak to my emphasis of the culture from day one. I think I've told you guys just I've really relied on some great leadership here and presented the goal, presented an evolving goal of a culture that we want to build here that means a lot. I think it's really important when things do get difficult and things get hard. It is not coach speak because I've lived it, and it's very, very important to me. And I think the players took to that pretty quickly. Especially led by our leadership group. We'll be announcing our captains here very soon. We'll get that information to you guys. But I think that part, you never want to say it was easy, but I just think that it was the right time and right place for me and with these players and the personal relationships to help rely on those guys and start getting that player ownership that you really strive for. Schematically, I would not say at all it's been difficult because the schemes we wanted to apply to our football team were really built for this team, not from any one particular background of offense, defense, or special teams, but for these guys just continuing to evolve and do what we think is best to help give us a chance to play complementary football and ultimately, win football games with how we're going to play in conjunction with the other two phases. So I feel really good about that. As far as the other aspect of the roster and some of those other things, I leave that to Kwesi and how we're looking to build and competitively put this thing together.
After you guys had Jesse Davis working with the ones for a good portion of the offseason, what went into the decision to ultimately deal him the other day?
Yeah, I think, it kind of works hand in hand with Ed. And I think, the progression, there was a lot of questions about how you integrate rookies into your lineups and how you truly evaluate them with that first group. And I think that you just look back at that circumstance and see the way where Ed started, where he progressed through, and then ultimately how we feel about him right now, still getting better every single day, but feeling really good about where he's at. And I think Jesse, to me, that was a hard conversation because all he's done since he got here was really be a huge focal point leadership-wise in that O-line room for Coach Coop. And in the end, we were able to find an opportunity for hopefully Jesse to go start, which at this point in his career he's done a lot of and deserves a chance to. And he was very much in the conversation to do that for us. Feel really good about that O-line room, the depth. I know it's not a lot of coaches can sit up here and say that, but I can promise you I feel really good about our guys we're keeping on the roster, and then the guys we're able to get to our practice squad, ultimately helping us withstand 17-plus games of how we're going to want to play.
Is the plan for Jalen Reagor to immediately slot in as the starting punt returner?
We're going to give him every opportunity to do that. We have some other guys on the roster we feel good about if need be, but Jalen's excited about that opportunity. I think he's got some good experience doing that, obviously some real flashes of doing that at a high level. We'll get him going from day one today and see where he's at going into Green Bay, and if he's comfortable going back there and he's our best option in our opinion to give us a chance to impact the game, he'll be back there.
Is there any reason that Jalen Naylor didn't get any preseason reps there at punt returner?
Not in particular. I think at the time we were really trying to see what Amir, could do and consistently do, and it just comes down to, it's a little different than other positions where you can say, hey, this guy gets a quarter or that quarter or this portion of the game. Sometimes 2.5 quarters can go by without a punt. Sometimes there can be 3 1/4, depending on how your defense is playing and what we're doing offensively to maybe possess the ball and eat up clock. So I don't particularly, it's not something that I directed our coaching staff to do or not do. I know if the opportunity was there, he had done it a ton in practice, both in the joint practices versus the Niners and every single day out there. And he'll continue to get reps at that as well. He's one of those guys I am referring to when I talk about the guys we currently already had before we added Jalen.
And is Osborne in that mix as well?
Yep, he'll be out there every day catching them as well.
Kwesi, how much were the moves this week? How strongly were they related to the salary cap? And how do you feel you guys stand with the cap right now?
I'll continue to say every NFL team has challenges. And, they set rules for us, and it's our job to overcome these rules, these constraints to optimize our team. And we're going to continue to do that, not just over this year, but over the years to come. So the decisions we made ultimately reflect what we think for this year, but also for the years to come and to fit in the time horizons of how we're trying to compete.
Are you still looking for ways to potentially use space that you have on the cap at this point?
Again, those are always ongoing conversations between Kevin and myself, Rob. I'm just really ultimately trying to figure out how to best suit this team to be where we want to be at the end.
It's a little inside baseball, but you guys did not have many roster moves during the course of training camp. Was that purely just a function of the health, of not needing to swap in health? Was there any other thought process behind wanting to see guys more than a usual camp since it was your first year, or anything other than just the health?
It's a great question. Ultimately, it's a little bit of both. First, I want to start off by, thanking Tyler Williams, who's incredible as our head of player performance and health. He does such a great job with Kevin loading the players, getting them to perform optimally. So I think a lot of what you saw was reflective of Tyler and his staff and all that they do. But ultimately, like you said, we want to evaluate. We need information, and you need reps. You need to understand who these players are. When I first got here in my press conference, I said the best thing you can do is understand what's in your building. And so a lot of that is just you needing patience and needing the time to really go through that process in a detailed way.
When you had conversations both with Sean Mannion and Kellen and two different ends of the spectrum, like you were saying, and when you were a player, you said you got feedback, you're giving them totally different feedback. In any of that equation, did you talk with Kirk? Because, with a backup quarterback, it's more than just a snap away from playing. They also help the quarterback. Was he at all in any of that process, or how did that go?
He was not involved in really any of the evaluation process or anything like that. What I will say, a couple things on that. The conversations with Kellen and Sean that took place this week, that was not the first time discussing goals and areas of improvement, areas of strength. I mean, I constantly try to get with those guys individually from the time that we first came in here and really lay out a plan because, I mean, ultimately I talk to you guys a lot about our plan for our team, our goals for the week, for training camp and for our season and all these things. But I think if you're going to be heavily involved in that position as a play caller is and hopefully a head coach always is, I think you got to communicate with those guys on a daily basis, a weekly basis. They have to know the intent of the plays you're calling and the X's and O's, but the quarterback position, in my opinion, is a little bit more than that. It's a feel for a lot of variables, both in and out of their control, and unfortunately, sometimes those variables can make the position really difficult, or sometimes they make it seem a little easier. But I think the point of that dialogue, there was nothing shared with them in that final conversation, really with either one of those guys that probably surprised them, but at the same time, that didn't make the news any easier to deliver, and ultimately the upside of maybe getting to, whether it was immediately or down the line, getting to work with those guys again. They did everything we asked and then some to really stay in really good graces with me and our organization. And as far as Kirk, he's the leader of that room. He's the leader of our offense. I don't want to provide any breaking news, but he received a lot of votes to become a captain. You guys will find out just how many when we go through that. And it's not just in the quarterback room. Our entire team, I feel, with the platform Kirk's on right now with our team and how he's really taken it and run with it and authentically been himself every day, leading us from the front. Obviously, he has a role in that quarterback room, but it goes a lot further than that, and that's things we talk about every single day.
Kevin, was it your assumption, like in the spring, that one of those two guys would, just an assumption that one of the two would rise to the level of being a backup, or in hindsight, why was that?
Yeah, it was not my assumption, and in fact, I told both those guys, just understand, you guys are not just competing with one another. I had them both in my office at one point and told them that. I said, I want somebody to win the job, not just the competition between the other. And that meant whoever we felt was going to be our number 2 quarterback needs to, in my opinion, give us the best chance to win football games, both with a week of preparation if that guy's called upon being one snap away, or within the game of being able to execute the game plan that we hope to have each and every week to best attack our opponents. And with Kirk as our starting quarterback, that can go a lot of ways because of his skill set, and then more importantly, the guys around those guys, both up front and at the skill position. So we were constantly evaluating it from a perspective of what gave us the best chance to win should that number 2 quarterback be called into action, and then ultimately laying out a competition that hopefully allowed those guys to feel like in the end the fairness of it all was there and the opportunity was there. And ultimately we had to make a very difficult decision that I know we did not take lightly, but I do feel like we did what was in the best interest of giving us a chance to win football games.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.